Hello, this is Dr. Stephen Jaros with the video explanation for how I graded exam number 2. Let's look at the questions. First, number 1. What kind of structure did Matsushita Corporation develop? Why did they develop this structure? Was it a help or a hindrance competing against Philips? Did any problems develop over time? Explain. Well, there were 4 parts to this question. What kind of structure did Matsushita Corporation develop? Well, they developed what is called a global structure. A global structure is a centralized kind of structure where almost all core activities are centralized in one location, in this case Japan, because that's where Matsushita was headquartered. And then subsidiaries were located around the world that received instructions from headquarters on how to conduct their operations. Why did they develop this structure? Well, they developed it because in a post-war climate of falling trade barriers and globalization, this allowed them to reduce their per-unit manufacturing costs. It also allowed them to capture economies of scale, and it allowed them to efficiently mass-produce large numbers of products for the global market. Was it a help or a hindrance competing against Philips? Well, it was a big help in competing against Philips because Philips was saddled with a decentralized multi-domestic structure where basically the entire corporation was duplicated in each of their subsidiaries. So Philips was operating on a much higher cost basis. They had redundancies in manufacturing, research and development, and marketing, which put them at a significant disadvantage compared to Matsushita with their centralized and globalized operations. Finally, did any problems with the structure develop over time? Yes. Problems developed with the structure because over time, as lower cost competitors emerged in places like China and Korea, Philips realized that Matsushita came to realize that their centralized global structure was very inflexible. It wasn't very good at adapting to changing market conditions in various countries. Subsidiary managers, because they were used to taking orders from headquarters, were not trained to be entrepreneurial and develop new business in their markets. And maybe most damaging of all, because the cost structure, the wages in Japan were much higher than in Korea or China, the centralized structure that Matsushita had put in place and the culture of lifetime employment made it virtually impossible for the company to implement layoffs. What they really needed to do was implement a lot of layoffs in Japan and move production to places like China where it could be conducted more cheaply, but their globalized structure prevented them from doing that. That was a major cause for their losses and competitive losses that they suffered at the hands of Chinese and Korean competitors. All right, let's look at question number 2. What kind of foreign research and development facility is appropriate if a firm is seeking to tap into knowledge being generated in a foreign country? What is the job of the leader of such a facility? What kind of background or skills should the leader have? Well, the name of the R&D facility, the type of R&D facility that this kind of company should have is something called a home-based augmenting R&D facility, home-based augmenting, because the idea is to locate a facility, an R&D facility in a foreign country that will extract knowledge from that foreign country and send it back to the home base or the home country where headquarters is located. So the idea is to enrich the knowledge of the home base of the company, headquarters, by farming knowledge that is being developed in subsidiary locations around the world. The job of the leader of a home-based augmenting facility is to cultivate strong ties with local scientific facilities, research laboratories, colleges and universities, government research labs, and think tanks, so that the home-based augmenting facility can draw on their knowledge, draw on their expertise, and transfer that knowledge back to the home country. So basically, you want to establish this facility, and the job of the leader is to make contacts with local thought leaders and intellectuals and scientists so that they can tap their knowledge and transfer it back to the home country. What kinds of background or skills should the leader have? Well, the primary skill of a home-based augmenting leader is that they are an esteemed or high-profile research scientist. Okay, you want to be a high-profile research scientist because then you will have the respect of the local intellectuals in the foreign country. They will be eager to work with you and collaborate with you because they see you as a valuable scientific colleague. Someone with managerial skills but who lacks scientific skills will not be regarded with much respect by the local scientists. So that's the primary skill. Although they do also have to have some managerial skills, and it helps if they have some bicultural knowledge, that is, knowledge of not only their home country, but the subsidiary that they are working within. Okay, let's look at question number 3. Regarding the SK2 skincare line, what are the advantages and disadvantages of investing more in the Japanese market compared to entering the European market with the product? Well, these are 2 of the 3 options that Procter & Gamble have established for the SK2 skincare line, which of course was developed within Japan. The advantages of investing further in Japan are, familiarity. We're already selling SK2 in Japan. It's a successful product. The Japanese consumers, who are highly sophisticated beauty connoisseurs, are familiar with the product and like it. They're familiar with the 7-step process. Okay, so the market's already established. We already have production in Japan. We already have marketing. We have supply chain, logistics, distribution. All of that is already in place. All right. Plus, there's a lot more room for growth. Let me just pause right here. Many of you said that the Japanese beauty market is saturated. No. At the time of the case, SK2 only had 2% penetration of the Japanese market. So there was plenty of room for growth, for growing the SK2 product line within Japan. All right, but in contrast, in Europe, if they go to Europe, it's a very different ballgame. In Europe, the SK2 product line is unknown. Okay, it's completely unknown. They would have to spend a ton of marketing trying to penetrate the European market. The European beauty market itself is highly saturated and highly competitive. There are many high-end established skincare lines, name brand skincare lines in Europe. So it would take a lot of money in terms of marketing to try to break into that market if it could be done at all. All right. What about the disadvantages of investing further in Japan? Well, the main disadvantage of investing further in Japan is that it would be contrary to Procter & Gamble corporate strategy. Procter & Gamble has established a corporate strategy of developing more global brands. It's trying to move away from having brands that are really successful in one country like Japan and wants to be able to develop brands on a global basis. SK2 is a prime example of this. So if they were to reinvest in Japan, it would be, they would be giving up on their long-term strategy of developing global brands. Right? Also, in terms of Europe, disadvantage of not investing in Europe, even with all the problems I described, the European market is a very wealthy market. It's a large market. The consumers, there are plenty of high-end consumers with disposable income. So if they were able to break into the market, they could be quite successful there. All right, let's look at question number 4. What kind of organizational structure did firms typically adopt when they reach the latest, most developed phase of internationalization? Did this structure tend to work well? Explain. More generally, in building a transnational organization, should a firm start by modifying its structure? Explain. Again, a multi-part question. So what about the first part? What kind of organizational structure did firms typically adopt when they reach the most developed phase? Well, according to the Stopford and Wells International Development Model, the model I was referring to, the matrix structure. The matrix structure is the kind of structure that most firms that were fully internationalized, that had a high level of diversity of foreign product sales and also a high percentage of foreign sales compared to domestic sales, they would develop and implement what is called a matrix structure, meaning a structure that's organized by both product and by geography. Did this structure tend to work well? No, it did not. It didn't tend to work well. While it looked good on paper, there were a lot of problems with the matrix structure. One big problem is that you would have information log jams, because you had a situation where a given person in an employee in a strategic business unit typically had to report to 2 managers, a product area manager and a geographic area manager. And so information would tend to get stifled or stopped at each of these SBU nodes, right? Also, this created problems in terms of reporting. Having to report to 2 bosses means that you generate a lot more paperwork. There's a lot more communication that has to take place. And then worst of all, because you have dual reporting, this creates turf wars and power conflicts. It also creates seize-ups or gridlock in terms of decision making. Because, if I'm an employee and my area manager tells me to do one thing and my product manager tells me to do another thing, then what am I supposed to do? I'm kind of stuck. I'm in a catch-22 situation. So the matrix structure proved to be very inefficient. It just didn't work, right? More generally, in building a transnational organization, which is the kind of organization you should try to develop when you become maximally internationalized, okay, should a firm start by modifying its structure? No. According to the authors of the book, structure is the last thing that a firm should attempt to modify. The first thing you want to modify is the attitudes of the people. You need to, as a leader, you need to convince your employees that change is necessary. In other words, you've got to start by altering the mindsets of your people, convincing them that change is necessary. Then, once you've achieved psychological change, then you want to change what are called the relationships and processes that make up an organization, or what the authors call the physiology of the firm. Only after you've changed employee attitudes, meaning the firm's psychology, and its relationships and processes, its physiology, should you try to change its structure or anatomy. All right, that's my explanation for how I graded exam 2. I hope you find it helpful in terms of understanding how your exam was graded.